This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, I am your co-host, Ryan Hickey, alongside Brian Tripp. Welcome. You've made it now to episode 2. We're off and running, Brian. Don't let us get hot here.
No, it's great. College football is back. Actually got to spend a Saturday sitting down, watch College Game Day, watch the Georgia Tech Florida State game. By the way, a game not even into the regular season, week 0. No Big Ten teams played in week 0. A game that could have significant implications because of that result for the Big Ten, right?
It's crazy. We thought at least Thursday the real season gets started, right? When you have Minnesota, Rutgers, Illinois kicking off the conference's year. But you're right. Florida State already a top 10 team losing in week 0 already, I think, opens a door where you look at the ACC. I think it was assumed, you could believe it was a one-bid league where just the conference champ would get a bid. And whether it was Clemson, Florida State, Miami, those 2 or 3 teams kind of left out of not being the champion, it looked like a tough path for them to get multiple bids. And now I think just one game confirms that. Not to get too overreactionary to just one game, but you look at Florida State, like, it feels like the AP poll really misjudged and miscalculated the Seminoles, just because you watch that game and whether it's their offense not being explosive, their defense just getting sliced and diced. You look at their schedule. I know it's one game, and the expanded playoff now is put into effect in part because one loss is not in your season. It does feel like when you're looking at how many leagues can get bids, it feels safe to say when you look at how Florida State played on Saturday, plus the schedule they have coming over, they still play Clemson, they still play Notre Dame, they still play Miami. It feels like we could say right now Florida State is cooked.
Yeah, I mean, their only chance, I think, at this point, the rest of the way, is to find a way to win the ACC. And maybe the ACC is a 2 or 3 loss team that wins the conference. You never know, right? But I don't think that's an outlandish hot take to say one game has significantly altered from the beginning of the year when one of your front runners, a top 10 preseason team, loses in the first week of the regular season, in week 0, playing in Dublin against the Georgia Tech team that remarkably is improved. There's no doubt about that, but it definitely changes the perception not only of Florida State, but the entire league for the rest of the season. At least, until everyone else starts playing and then we can overreact to other games. But it definitely changes my perception of what Florida State and the ACC have going into week number 1.
You're right. So if you're a Michigan fan, if you're a Penn State fan, if you're even an Iowa fan, that is, so far, your season's off to a good start. You have to feel a little bit better about your chances of making the playoff now when it looks like the ACC could cannibalize itself. And if you're right where the champ is a 2-loss or 3-loss team, assuming it's not a major upset and a team goes in there undefeated or with 1 loss and that upset gets pulled, that seems like you said it more than ever now. You feel confident saying the ACC will be a one-bid league, champ gets in, everyone else left out, which is good for obviously teams in the SEC, but more specifically the Big Ten. If you're trying to get 3-4 teams in, you're going to need the ACC and the Big 12 to really cannibalize each other. One game so far, that has come to fruition.
Yeah, it's just one game, but we went into week 0 saying there aren't really any intriguing matchups. Well, it turns out a top 10 team, that's the beauty of college football. A top 10 team loses in week number 1. And there's always 1 or 2 of those teams that start the year in the top 10 and then end up on the outside of the AP top 25 or the college football playoff rankings at the end of the season. Maybe it's Florida State, maybe it's too early to judge, but certainly early returns on DJU at his third school are not high right now for Florida State. But that does bring me, Ryan, to what are the most intriguing matchups in the Big Ten now that the Big Ten slate is here in week number 1? What would you say the most intriguing matchup? You can give me 1 or 2. Week number 1 in the Big Ten.
I'll go easy then. I'll say USC LSU because that for me, we're going to do 18 teams in 18 minutes here. We're going to give you a quick preview for every team. And I'll spoil at least a little bit with what I'm about to say with USC. They are I don't know how you feel, but for me, they are the toughest team to nail down. I do feel in one way they are getting undervalued and overlooked, where it still is Lincoln Riley. And the reality is every year he's been around, that offense bare minimum produces. You have to think the defense will be better. So it's I'm looking at man, are we really sleeping on USC? And if they can win this game week 1 against LSU, you really now inspire confidence in your team. You can get rolling, and maybe all of a sudden now that Michigan game in week number 3 looks a little bit easier, but also there's not as much pressure on you to win because you already have that win in week number 1 locked up. And so that to me feels like a swing game for the Trojans, where we could be talking about them in the Big Ten conference race and even maybe on the borderline college football playoff race if you can win that game week number 1, where I don't see that pendulum swinging back and forth or really any other team. So I'll go USC, LSU. That feels like a real fork in the road. Which way is USC going to go this year? I feel like we can get a definitive answer very quickly in Las Vegas on Sunday.
And I feel like for the Penn State, West Virginia matchup, and there's 3 games, Penn State, West Virginia, obviously the one you talked about in USC at LSU, but also North Carolina at Minnesota. Minnesota, new quarterback, Brosmer coming in from New Hampshire, a team that does have some skill position talent on offense. Can PJ Fleck get his defense to turn around? You talk about your perception of an ACC, a UNC team against a Big Ten team. If Minnesota wins that game, that's great for the Big Ten. And the thing I look at the Penn State-West Virginia matchup, probably Penn State, one of its toughest games of the year comes in this week, number 1, at least on paper, having to go on the road to one of the Power 4, a Big 12 team. And West Virginia, a team that some, not just Pat McAfee, but some others are saying could win the Big 12 this season. And West Virginia, kind of like USC, this game means so much to it. What's the perception of West Virginia going to be after that game? Return a really good quarterback in Green. They feel like his passing is going to be better this year. Lost some along the offensive line. Zach Frazier, obviously a great center for them last year, playing up the road in Pittsburgh. But it's a team, if their defense is improved and West Virginia can continue to build offensively like they did at the end of last year, for a Penn State team that's looking to get over that hurdle, make a 12-team college football playoff. We talked about how the playoff probably benefits no team more than Penn State because they would have been in 6 times in James Franklin's tenure here at Penn State. He goes into his 11th year. That, to me, that game, because of what it could mean for West Virginia as a legitimate playoff contender, Big 12 contender, but obviously Penn State cannot have a hiccup in week 1 if they want to get to where they think they should be at the end of the season. That game, to me, it's 1A and 1B, USC, LSU. But then is Penn State really going to make that push to get over the hurdle, get over that hump this year, especially when you get to look at what their new coordinators bring to the table on offense in particular, and Andy Kotelnicki for the first time.
Right. If you want to be a serious team and a true playoff contender, look, it's going to be a hostile environment. It's a tough way to start your season with 3 new coordinators, but you're right. You have to win that game. You have to go on the road to Morgantown and beat them. And like you said, I mean, West Virginia is going to be fired up after losing in the fashion they did last year in the season opener, this last year in State College. So they are motivated. They're fired up. Like you said, they could be a sleeping, maybe not a sleeping giant, but a team under the radar here that we could be talking about in November. Like, oh, wow, West Virginia. How do we not see this coming if they're right in the midst of the Big 12 race? That starts for them, like you said, week number 1. They win this one. I think they propel big time moving forward here. It's up to Penn State big time to really, for them, I think, show they're a real candidate by winning this game.
Yeah, and the Big 12 is a lot different than I think. The Big 10, and obviously we'll talk a ton about the Big 10 favorites, Ohio State, Oregon. Then you feel like that tier 2 is Penn State, Michigan, USC, like Iowa, who can get into that tier 1? Can Penn State make that? In the Big 12, you have probably 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that could arguably win the league because without Texas and Oklahoma, I'm not sure you have that clear-cut tier 1. And the Big 12 is different than obviously the Big 10, the ACC with Clemson, and the SEC where you have your favorites every year, Georgia, Alabama, whatever, the list goes on and on. Ole Miss probably in this year. The Big 12 doesn't have that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, where I think the other 3 Power 4 leagues all have those clear-cut teams that on paper, right, you can legitimately say are national, not just playoff contenders, but national title contenders to start the year.
The last thing I want to say about Penn State, West Virginia, and the importance for the Nittany Lions to get off to a good start here is you look at their schedule, like at least when you look at USC, LSU, USC could, in theory, lose that game to LSU, but they have a road trip to Michigan coming up. They play Penn State. Like, they have a strength of schedule where they, if they lose early, still can rebound, win games, go 10-2, and still have a resume that is impressive enough for the committee to put them in. It's definitely not a season ender because they do have other areas to get impressive wins. You look at Penn State's schedule, the big one is Ohio State coming to town November 2nd. They do go on the road at USC, but it's like if you lose to West Virginia week number 1, like you said, with how wide open it is, if West Virginia is a surprise team this year, and we're talking about a top 15-ish team, that is a resume boost that Penn State probably needs because outside of, again, a trip to USC, who I think could go either way here. They may not be ranked by the time Penn State plays them. They could be a top 15 team. And outside of Ohio State, like if you go 10-2, record-wise, that should say, oh, you're in for sure in a 12-team playoff. But if Penn State doesn't beat anybody, if they don't beat anyone of consequence, if they don't have a ranked win on their resume because let's say they lose to West Virginia and Ohio State and USC is not as good as we think, you could be on the outside looking in at 10-2 even because of who you've played, your strength of schedule, and not having that impressive win on your resume. This could be one where right now West Virginia is not ranked, right, going into the season. That could be one where you look up 6 weeks in and they could be 5-1.
I think it's a much larger discussion as we start to look at what is a committee going to look at for those teams that do finish 10-2, maybe even 9-3, a Big Ten or an SEC team that's 9-3. How are they going to evaluate? What metrics are they going to use? Is it better to have a signature win and a bad loss somewhere along the way? Or if your 2 losses are to teams that are title contenders or championship teams in their conference, do they say, all right, you didn't beat the best 2 teams on your schedule? It's a much bigger discussion than a Penn State 2024 discussion. It's a college football playoff discussion,
right?
And something I'm looking forward to learning as this thing goes. No matter what your team is or who your team is, you can use Penn State as an example. This is where I think coaches are going to have to change the narrative in how they discuss a loss with the media, with their fans, to keep that buy-in. Because right now, one loss used to mean basically the end of the season for any team that had aspirations to make a 4-team playoff. Now, one loss, not only how you control the messaging in your locker room, but for your fan base to get that buy-in, to get that support, 1 or 2 losses is far from the end of the world, particularly for a team of pedigree in one of the major conferences, the Big Ten or the SEC. I do anticipate a team with 3 losses qualifying for the college football playoff out of one of those leagues, and out of those leagues, definitely 10-2 teams will be in the college football playoff.
To answer your question real fast here, I hope first and foremost, and the committee changes every year because the members cycle in and out. So even though they try to say, hey, we value the same thing every year, I think it does change just because it's human nature. Some people value certain aspects and certain measurements over others. I hope first and foremost, who you beat is number one. Like you play the games, right? You have to beat good teams if you want to make the playoff, especially now in a 12-team playoff. I don't care if you're 12-0 or 11-1 and 10-2. If your 10 wins are against cupcakes and your 2 losses are against the 2 best teams in your schedule, like I would rather reward a 9-3 team with an impressive win or 2, but an extra loss over a team that hasn't beaten anybody, hasn't impressed. So I hope at least the committee still values wins first and foremost here. How do you feel about that?
It's all
like, do you value impressive win or better loss, quote unquote?
I think you have to take each on a case-by-case basis. And that's hard to say because then your measuring stick moves for each program. You're going to have – someone's going to be on – whether it's a 14-team playoff, a 12-team playoff, a 16-team playoff, or a 68-team March Madness field. Someone is going to feel left out at the very end. Someone's going to feel left out no matter what that magic number is. With 12 teams, I still think it's a case-by-case basis, and you just have to evaluate the team based on, number one, their resume is important because that's their body of work. That's what they did throughout the course of the season, but that's where you start to have that eye test thing come in again at the end. And is that a team, if you put them in the playoff, did they have a key injury for a game in one of those losses? Did they have extenuating circumstance that impacted those losses? You just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And I think it's unfair to say, hypothetically, sitting here on August 26th, what's going to happen come mid-December.
Yeah, it's going to be chaos. That is for sure. Speaking of chaos here, so we talked about some games that could change not only the Big Ten race, but also the college football playoff race here in week number 1. USC, LSU, Penn State, West Virginia. It's a lot of other cupcake schools, mostly a lot of week 1 snoozers here. So if we open up the schedule a little bit, Trip, I mean, come on. I mean,
yeah.
Well, let's be honest here. Rutgers is playing Howard. Like, are we going to learn a lot from that game against Howard? Like, Illinois is playing Illinois State. Like, are we going to learn a lot from that game? Like, it's a preseason for the most part here. We got some good matchups in general, but week 1, especially in the Big Ten, is largely a preseason schedule here. So if we open it up a little bit and look at just the rest of the year, I liked what you said last week. If you missed our first episode, check it out. You obviously watch on YouTube, so you know where the channel is. Check us or go check out our first episode. You brought up a really interesting point because now with the 12-team playoff, I think a lot of certain games now are more important than they otherwise would be in the past. And I think big games, quote unquote, let's just say, I would say the most marquee matchup of the year is Ohio State at Oregon. That in a way goes down a notch just because whoever wins that game, the loser, we're still putting, I mean, we could still put in the Big Ten championship game realistically, but at least we're putting the playoff. There's no questions of, is the loser going to make the playoff? We feel pretty confident whether it's Oregon or Ohio State, both of those teams will be in the playoff. So it's like that game is important, but in the grand scheme of the Big Ten race and the college football playoff race, it's not as important because we feel both teams will be in. Seeding is really where it matters more than anything else. But if you look at the schedule now, what games do you identify as maybe an under the radar? This could have a real impact on either the Big Ten conference race, or maybe this could be a way for a team to sneak into the college football playoff race.
And make sure you subscribe to our podcast as well on that YouTube page. Make sure you subscribe. I think, and you brought up the point we made in week 1, like for Ohio State, do they just need to win 1 of 3 games against Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan, and do they still make the college football playoff at 10-2? For example, Penn State, Ohio State, based on what happens in Eugene, could mean a lot more for the Buckeyes when they visit Happy Valley than if Penn State is unbeaten going into that matchup and Penn State beats everyone else. It doesn't matter what they do against Ohio State. But the games that can change the landscape, Texas at Michigan. If Michigan could somehow knock off one of the favorites of the SEC and a top 5 team in the preseason, then all of a sudden Michigan is a legitimate college football playoff contender. And a lot of people have them on the outside looking in this year. You're kind of not sure what you're going to get with Michigan. But that to me is probably, it's those games where you have the power, where you have playoff contenders facing playoff contenders from other leagues. Those are the games that are most important to me. But Texas at Michigan, I think, is hands down number 1. If you're talking about in-league games, I think it's the game. I think it's the big game between Michigan and Ohio State because Michigan, again, is going to need, at least the perception coming into the year, is some sort of marquee moment to prove that they are for real. And based on their schedule and having Texas on that schedule, maybe it's that game at Ohio State. You feel like Michigan's not going to run the table. So if you lose to Texas, you're going to need something, and that's going to be it. But I think Michigan being a fringe team for the playoff in the Big Ten, you're looking, can they get 4 teams in? Maybe Penn State doesn't have the season that you and I thought they think they might have. Those big matchups for Michigan are the ones that stand out to me on the schedule for the whole year in how the college football race can be shaped by Big Ten results.
I want to throw 2 by you here that a little bit on the outside here, but I'm curious your thoughts. Number 1, the last game of the year, Nebraska at Iowa. That is a really fascinating game in a conference, again, where there's no divisions, where it's just the 2 best records. You talk about Ohio State, like their 2 biggest games are on the road at Oregon, at Penn State. Michigan comes to town. If you're 2-1, if you go 1-2 in those games, all of a sudden, don't look now if Iowa is able to, which is a big ask here, take care of business, especially offensively. They do have a favorable schedule where you're looking at it, and that could be a game where if Nebraska, let's say, surprises and they're maybe 8-3 at that point in the season, you could get a ranked win that helps propel you either to maybe put yourself in position to get a break to make the Big Ten title game, or get a break where if the SEC is not powerful like we think they are, you could maybe sneak your way in to be a in the conversation, at least, a team that we see just on the bubble. That's a big game, I think.
Is there an undefeated Big Ten team at the end of the year? In the 12 games, regular season?
I will say no. I think the team with the best chance to do that is Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I think they will beat Ohio State. They do have some tough road matchups at Michigan, which is going to be a physical kind of grinded out sort of game. I think the Ducks get got. I think the Buckeyes get got. I think Penn State. I would say no. Right now, no. We're looking at a one-loss champ. You feeling undefeated?
No, I think you're looking at a one-loss champ. No one goes undefeated in the Big Ten.
That is right. It's a tough. It's definitely. That's almost sounded like a slogan. Nobody goes undefeated in the Big Ten.
The Big Ten is unrivaled.
Reminded me of Matt Rule. We're the NFL of college football. We got some good quotes so far early in the year before the Big Ten schedule even starts.
UCLA
Another one here
is in LA.
That they are.
We're in LA. Deshaun Fox.
We should start a T-shirt shop and just sell Big Ten slogan T-shirts. That's 3 good ones already.
Still enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast.
It's 4. We are hot right now. Please, this is a verbal trademark. No one steal our idea. If so, just give us a few bucks on the side. Congrats for your burgeoning business.
Let's do our 18 teams in 18 minutes predictions.
Alrighty. So we are going to stay on track here. Let me just pull up my phone to make sure. I do have a timer.
Keep time. Do you have an alarm that's going to go off, or are we just gonna do it roughly?
We'll see. We'll do the 18 minutes exactly. I'll give updates as we go here. But I don't know about you. I get
that's good. We'll
chills when I hear the when I get the alarm. So we'll keep that off here. All right. So 18 teams, 18 minutes, 30 seconds each prediction, season prediction, record wise, what we think will happen for each team in the Big Ten Conference. Trip, you want to start us off here? The timer is started.
All right, we're going in alphabetical order. Let's start with Illinois. It's hard to believe an I team would start in alphabetical order in this league, but it does. Illinois fails to make a bowl game for the 3rd time in 4 years under Brett Bielema. They added wide receivers in the transfer portal. Luke Altmaier is back at quarterback, but he had a 13 touchdown, 10 interception ratio last season. Had 5 wins last year. The defense lost a lot. I don't think Illinois has enough to overcome what they lost on defense, despite being a little better on offense. And their Big Ten schedule is brutal. At Nebraska, at Penn State, home against Purdue, but then Michigan and at Oregon in the first 5 weeks of conference play. They'll have a losing record for the 12th time in 13 seasons.
I think they get a bowl. I'm going to say 6-6. I do think Luke Altmaier will be a little bit better with the help of Zachary Franklin, leading current right now wide receiver in college football. They have 7 home games, which is favorable for them. Don't have to go on the road as much. And last year, look at a lot of their losses. They lost their last 3 games of the season by a combined 8 points. I'm going to say at least one of those losses kind of turns their way in 2024. They win a close game that maybe they didn't last year. 6-6. Illinois, I think, sneaks into a bowl game here in 2024.
All right, speaking of 6-6, Indiana, they make a bowl game in Kirk Cignetti's first year as head coach. Curtis Rourke, 7,650 passing yards in his career, 50 passing touchdowns from Ohio. They bring in 4 coaches from James Madison, where he was so successful offensively as a head coach. They have that continuity on staff. There's a lot of buy-in in Bloomington right now. I think the energy, the first-year new head coach wave, I think it carries Indiana to 6 wins, and they find a way into a bowl game.
I'm going to go even a little bit higher. I like 7-5. I'm with you, though. I think Indiana makes a bowl. I like the energy right now and the offensive juice that Cignetti is bringing. This should be, for the Hoosiers, their best offense since Michael Penix Jr. kind of helped light up the world in 2020. And it is a favorable schedule where you do play Nebraska at home. You play Michigan at home. Still tough games at Ohio State. But otherwise, it's a lot of toss-up games against Big Ten teams that are either maybe just a little bit better or definitely worse than Indiana. Favorable schedule. I like right now what Cignetti has done. He's proven to be a winner at the FBS level at JMU. I'll say 7-5 bowl game for Indiana.
I don't count the 2020 season.
Okay. Well, for this example, I will. But that's a common belief by many.
The Iowa Hawkeyes, I have them finishing in the top 15, but not making the college football playoff. They return 151 career starts on their offensive line. They have a great tight end back after an injury last season. Their defense, Jay Higgins, All-American linebacker, Yaya Black at defensive tackle, Sebastian Castro, all 3 levels. They have a potential next level player in that defense. The defense returns basically everyone from last season. However, I don't think they're good enough offensively. I think they're the best of the rest outside of Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State in the Big Ten. I think they're right up there with Michigan because of their schedule, but they're not good enough to avoid hiccups along the way. The only team that's truly better than them on their schedule is Ohio State, but they are not a good enough team to go 11-1 or 10-2. Iowa, 9-3. They finished in the top 15, but missed the playoff.
That's exactly the record I have, 9-3. And just to add what you said, they feel like the most predictable team in the Big Ten, where they're going to be elite defensively. They're going to be elite special teams wise, even though they've lost, you could argue maybe the greatest punter in their storied history. But they are a team that plays great hard-nosed defense, forces a lot of turnovers, and offensively, it's going to be a conservative offense that I think still, even with the new OC and Tim Lester, it's still going to be the philosophy of let's just not have the offense lose us the game. Don't turn the ball over. Don't be aggressive. So even though there should be, it's impossible for this offense to be any worse than it's been in the last few years. I think it will improve, but I'm with you, not to the level where you can really take this team seriously as a college football playoff threat. I don't think they'll have the resume either to, kind of really stand on to be one of the 12 teams at the end of the year. I'm with you, 9-3, Iowa top 20 season, but nowhere near the college football playoff.
The Maryland Terrapins, I think they'll have their 4th straight winning season. They've won 3 straight bowl games. I think there's probably a couple teams in the Big Ten that benefit, certainly Penn State because of where they sat behind Ohio State and Michigan, Rutgers, Maryland. This is one of those teams that benefits from divisions going away probably the most in the Big Ten because they were 1-20 all time against Ohio State and Michigan since joining the league. But they do return. You lose to Leah Tungavailoa, but Ty Felton, Caden Prather back at wide receiver, Roman Hemby at running back. It's a team that's always had skill position talent. They had a quarterback to go with it last year, but they didn't make enough plays on defense against the upper echelon teams in the league, the 3 we just mentioned, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. I like Maryland to have another good year, 7, 8 wins, maybe 9 wins if they can pull out some close games. But again, that's kind of where Maryland is right now, a 7-9 win team at the very most. I do think they win their 4th consecutive winning season, though.
I'm going to say 6-6 for the Terps. I'm glad you brought their wide receivers. You could argue outside of Ohio State and Oregon, this is the best 3-headed monster receiver on the conference. They have a lot of talent there. But like you said, you lose to Leah Tungavailoa. Right now, Mike Locksley is not announced a quarterback. It still seems like a 3-man competition. That, to me, is concerning going into game week that you still have yet to announce your starting quarterback. So even though you have good wide receivers to throw the ball to, I'm just not sold that the quarterback position is going to be, play that well like we've seen in previous years for the Terps. And they have a brutal schedule down the stretch where you end the season home against USC, at Oregon, Rutgers, who we'll get to here in a little bit, Iowa comes to town, at Penn State. Brutal finish to the season. I'll say 6-6 for the Terps. Bowl game, no winning season, though.
How are we doing on time?
We are doing good so far. We are cruising. We are at 6 minutes, 17 seconds. We're cruising.
Perfect pace. Michigan State. I have the Spartans losing 8 games this season. I think Jonathan Smith in his first season starts to turn the page in the right direction, but more than 60 new faces on their roster. Aiden Childs will set Michigan State up, not this year, the transfer quarterback from Oregon State, not this year, but Michigan State's 2 years away from being competitive again. I think Michigan State goes 4-8 this season. They have a losing record for the 4th time in 5 years. It's hard to believe you're saying that from where Mark D'Antonio had them just about a decade ago.
I'm with him. Actually, the same exact 4-8 for them. Like you said, I'm glad you brought up Aiden Childs. He was one of the most coveted players in the transfer portal, obviously coming from Oregon State, where Jonathan Smith came from. It was an easy, recruitment, if you will, for the new head coach. But I think it'll be an up and down season as the first year as a true starter. And like you said, 4 of the last 5 years, it's been a losing season. 2021 is looking more like an anomaly every single year. And outside of that year, they've been 18-26 the last 4 years. It's been tough right now sledding for the Spartans. I don't think it gets much better here in year number 1. Jonathan Smith is a builder, so there's no reason to panic here if they go 4-8 and it's a rough year. He's a slow builder. There will be optimism in East Lansing soon, not in 2024. I'm with you, 4-8.
Michigan Wolverines. I have them finishing the year at 9-3. I think Michigan pulls off a huge upset at some point during the season, whether it's against Oregon or Ohio State. I think it's a team that still has enough talent to beat anyone in the country. However, I don't think they have the depth and continuity to do it week in and week out, that the way the Wolverines are built going into 2024. Obviously, that tough game we talked about with Texas. I think they do upset someone along the way, but I think they also have a hiccup along the way that keeps them outside of the college football playoff looking in. Colston Loveland and Donovan Edwards on offense give you two bona fide starts. Even though Edwards has not been a starter in his career in Ann Arbor, he's an electric playmaker. We saw that in the college football playoff last year. And then they have first-round draft picks still littering on their defense. Mason Graham's as good of a defensive lineman as there is in the league. Will Johnson at cornerback. So they have the star power, but I don't think they have the depth, from 1 to 22, or even then first, second, two, three deep on their roster like they had last year. That's where I think Michigan takes a step back, but they still have so much star power that they're good enough to pull off a big upset or two this year.
I'm going to say 8-4 for the Wolverines. I think their season will mirror a lot like Iowa, where they have still a great defense. Like you just mentioned, you outlined some of the stars they have. Like that's going to be still a very formidable defense for the Wolverines. But similar to the Hawkeyes, I just don't trust right now this offense to come through when you need them to. I don't think they're beating Texas. I don't think they're beating Oregon. I don't think they're beating Ohio State. I think Alex Orji, we've not had a starter name yet for the Wolverines. If he's the guy, assuming he is, I just don't think he's going to be consistent enough, especially in the pass game, to elevate Michigan's offense to the point where they can go toe-to-toe with some of these big boys. I think the defense should keep them in most games. I don't think, though, the offense will be able to come through and win any of those big ones. So I think they go 0-3 in the big three games they have on their schedule. I think they lose another one on the way as well in that miss. I'll say 8-4 for the Wolverines here in year one under Sharon Moore.
Minnesota, I have beating UNC in week number 1. I think they're going to be better at quarterback with Max Brosmer, All-American from New Hampshire, transfers in from the FCS level. Daniel Jackson at wide receiver was an All-Big Ten selection last year. Darius Taylor, a lot of people are talking about on the offensive side of the football. I think they've got enough talent to win some big games this year, but defensively, I think they're going to be too inconsistent. They're going to get into some games that are those 35, 31 type games. And because when you're playing a game like that, they'd be built for success in the Big 12. But they're not built for success consistently in the Big Ten this season. I do have them going back to a bowl game, but that is it for Minnesota. It's a really, really tough schedule. I think 6-6 for the Golden Gophers. They're a really good 6-6 team, but still a 6-6 team at the end of the year.
This, I think, will be our biggest disagreement so far. I'm going to say 4-8. I'm not high on the Gophers. Number one, their run defense scares me. It was the worst in the Big Ten last year. And that game against USC, I know it's home this year, but Omarion Hampton is one of the best running backs in the country. Mm-hmm. He's coming to your house week number 1 with a very leaky run defense. That scares the hell out of me, to be honest with you. I like the fact I'm with you with Max Brosmer playing well, and Darius Taylor should take a lot of pressure off him, so you probably won't need to do too much. That defense, though, I just don't trust it now from Minnesota. You got a tough schedule where, again, North Carolina, I think, is a very losable game for the Gophers. You play Iowa, you're at Michigan, USC, Penn State. I am very down on the Gophers this year. I'll say 4-8 for PJ Fleck.
The Nebraska Cornhuskers, 5-7 last season. It tied them for their most wins since 2016. They've had 7 straight losing seasons. Nebraska, winning record, 7-5. But I'm not ready to see the Huskers make that huge jump that so many are talking about them as a dark horse in the conference this year.
I wonder who you're talking about. I am in on Nebraska this year. I think we will see that jump that you're hesitant about. 9-3. I won't go crazy here. 10-2, 11-1. I think 9-3 is realistic here for Nebraska. Dylan Raiola is the best quarterback they've had on that team, you could argue, since the turn of the century. The turnover battle that they lost severely last year at -17, I think will improve. They still have one of the best rushing defenses in all the country. So, again, you don't need Raiola to play hero ball in order for Nebraska to win a lot of these games. I'll say 9-3 for the Huskers. A big year here for Matt Rule and co. I think optimism will be back truly in Lincoln for the first time in a long time. As a time update, we got just under 6 minutes left. We are cruising here.
We're in good shape. All right, Northwestern Wildcats.
They are coming back down to earth. I think 4-8. It was a great year last year for David Braun, going 8-5. I think reality's hitting them. I think the offense is going to struggle, even though Mike right now is coming over. They have a brutal schedule. Washington, Wisconsin, at Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois. I think reality's hitting Northwestern here 4-8.
Completely agree. Ohio State Buckeyes.
I will say, let me get the exact number here up for you. 13-2. I think they lose to Oregon on the road. I think they lose in the final four of the playoff. I don't think they win the Big Ten. Clearly don't win the national title. With where expectations are, 13-2, I think, will be considered a failure here for Ryan Day and Ohio State. I don't think they achieved their goals that they came back for.
I think Ohio State falls to Oregon on the road, gets over the hurdle and beats Michigan, and makes a deep run in the college football playoff. I have them at 11-1 during the regular season. I didn't know we were including postseason on that. I have Ohio State 11-1. I really believe in all of the talent that they have on offense. And I think Will Howard doesn't have to be great. He just needs to not turn the football over. 25 interceptions during his time at Kansas State. I think Chip Kelly's offense is going to make them he's going to make him a field general in that offense. I think he's going to use his legs. He runs a 4.5 40. The guy can fly. I think Ohio State's legit. I think Ohio State, Oregon. I guess I should just go into Oregon, right? They're next on the list. I didn't want to have any spoilers there. I think Ohio State, Oregon, and the next team we're going to talk about, Penn State, all make the college football playoffs. So Oregon, I also have at 11-1.
I agree with their regular season record. I'll take it a step further. I think they'll win the national title this year. They're my pick to win it all. I am very bullish. I love the fit for Dylan Gabriel. I love the offensive talent around him. I think this is the year Dan Lanning and the Ducks break through. National title pick, but at least if you want to keep it to the regular season, I think they win the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, I think Oregon has so much talent on offense. It's how do those transfers come together for the Ducks? I had Ohio State 11-1, Oregon 11-1. I have Penn State 11-1 as well, and I think Penn State qualifies for the Big Ten playoff or the Big Ten championship game, and I think Penn State's in the college football playoffs as they finally make that jump into the postseason for head coach James Franklin.
I agree. I think they'll win a playoff game, but I'm with you. 11-1, I like it. They are a playoff team in 2024, no doubt about it.
Who's the loss to?
Ohio State. I think they just can't get over that hump right now.
I think
you think they beat them?
Ohio State. Yep.
Wow.
I think Oregon's losses at Michigan, Ohio State loses at Penn State, and Penn State has a hiccup somewhere along the way, whether it's at Wisconsin, at West Virginia, at USC. One of those games I think Penn State trips up on.
Wow. All right. I like it. All right. Sorry. You are the man who has them in order.
Purdue.
I do not. I'm unprepared.
Purdue
4-8. Then not a very good year for them. I like the offensive chemistry with Hudson Card and Devin Mockabee. You have four offensive linemen returning, so it should be a fun offense for Ryan Walters here in year two. But you look at their schedule trip. You could argue this is one of the toughest in the country where you play Notre Dame. You're at Oregon State. I know they lost a lot, but it's still a tough environment to go play in. Nebraska at Wisconsin, Oregon at Ohio State, Penn State, Murderers Row. 4-8 for the Boilermakers.
You know, when you're doing an 18-team projection, you have a lot of information on the teams that are probably 1 through 10. You might have a little on the bottom feeders. Purdue just doesn't move the needle in either direction for me. They're kind of irrelevant right now in the new look Big Ten. I don't know where they fit. I also have them at 4-8, and I think it's going to be a tough go, not only this year, but for a while for the Boilermakers. Rutgers is next, and I have Rutgers. I think they have a good year. I think Greg Schiano's done a good job there. Certainly better quarterback play with the quarterback coming in from Minnesota. I think they've got some skill guys on offense. You know their defense is going to be good. If they can take some close games and end up on the right side of them with their defense, I have Rutgers at 8-4, but a very good 8-4 team.
I'm going to say 9-3. I really like Rutgers this year. You have Kyle Monangai, I would argue the most underrated running back in all the country. He at least in the Big Ten, he led the conference last year in rushing yards. You lose your middle linebacker, Torrey, which stinks, but I still think the defense will play at a high enough level. And you have a favorable schedule where you don't play Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, or Iowa. You miss the top 5 teams in the conference, not in your schedule. 2 tricky road trips at Virginia Tech, at USC. I think Rutgers, though, wins one of those. 9-3, best year since 2006 incoming for the Scarlet Knights.
Do you like how I just danced around pronouncing the name of Ethan Kaliakmanis?
Yes. You're a better man than me. I wasn't even going to try. That's a tongue twister. It's not different.
A lot of
you
potential.
Just say it how it's, yeah.
A lot of potential.
Good run game to help them out as well.
Something wasn't right last year at Minnesota. Something wasn't right. UCLA.
You're right about that. This is rough. I mean, honestly, record-wise, I will say for the Bruins here, 5-7. But I think if you're Deshaun Foster, what would be a success is just bringing juice, bringing some life, bringing some belief in this program here that is frankly dead with the way kind of last year ended and Chip Kelly left. This program is in flux. You're going to a new conference. 5-7, I think, would be respectable. I'm excited to see what Eric Bieniemy does now as the offensive coordinator. Yeah. You have Ethan Garbers as an athletic quarterback, so you should have some fun there. But I think forget record for a second with UCLA. They're one of the teams where I think records are relevant. If Deshaun Foster can have not even the players, the fan base believing in this team and the trajectory they're going forward, I would say that's a massive win for the Bruins here in year number 1.
Chip Kelly did an unbelievable job there. I think the offense takes a small step back, but not that big of a step back because of the background of Eric Bieniemy. I think they have some skill guys. They're fast. They're athletic just because of what they've recruited. They lost a lot, but defense, I think, takes a huge step back for UCLA with Danton Lynn going from UCLA to USC. He did an unbelievable job there last season. I think it's the defense that takes a step back, but I think they're still going to be entertaining to watch. I like 5-7. That number you had, I like that pick for UCLA. Now USC.
Travel is brutal, by the way, for them. I mean, they go around the globe, essentially. Brutal.
Yeah. USC.
Toughest team, I said before, to lock down. I'm going to say 8-4 for the Trojans. I think Miller Moss will have success. I mean, every quarterback in that system has, so I don't right now think that's going to change under Lincoln Riley. Defense will improve. Again, it's impossible for them to get any worse. They have a tough schedule where I think they will win an impressive game or two. I think they do win the LSU game here to open up the season. But whether it's physicality on both lines of scrimmage, I just don't think they're tough enough right now in this era of the Big Ten to be a real contender for the conference. I'll say 8-4 for the Trojans.
We did not share our notes going into this. I completely agree with you.
Really?
You know, we had some that we didn't agree on earlier. I completely agree with you on USC. I don't think they're a 6-6, 7-5 team just because I believe in Lincoln Riley still. And I think they have enough talent. It's still USC. They lost some tight games last year. They gave up a lot of points, but they lost some tight games last year. I think they're a little bit better on defense, but to your point, I feel like it's a real safe prediction with them, but a safe prediction might be the right prediction with the Trojans.
And finally,
all right,
let's wrap it up.
Where are we on top? We have to be over 18 minutes, right?
We're at 20 minutes here, so it's okay. We're giving the conference some love.
The Dubs, Washington and Wisconsin. Washington, I'll tell you first, I have Washington at 5-7 this season. I think Jed Fish comes in from Arizona. He's been successful everywhere he's been. It's his 18th different coaching job. He averages 1.5 years at each position that he's held. But he took Arizona from 1-11 to 10-3, beat Oklahoma by 2 touchdowns in the Alamo Bowl. I just think there's so much turnover. Washington is a team. You look, New Year's Six Bowl game, 2016, 2017, 2018. Obviously, we're in the national championship game last year. I think it's a program that is destined to get back to being a successful team, maybe not a tier 1, but a tier 2 team as you kind of rank them in the Big Ten, and someone that can make a run at a championship every 5-10 years. They're kind of built for that model of college football right now. I like Washington. I just don't like them this year. I think give Jed Fish another year, but 5-7 this year, lay a foundation, get your own people in there. Then next year, kind of like Michigan State, who's that team that's going to start to take those jumps? I think Washington, just because of everything they lost, 5-7 this year.
Like you said, we did not compare notes. I had no idea what you were going to say about every team so far in this preview. I'm with you exactly. 5-7. And this cupboard is bare right now for Fish. Yep. You know how many starters he has back on offense? 0.
Wait.
All 11.
Hold up.
Transferred, graduated, went to the NFL.
What is bare?
The cupboard. I don't know. That's one of those words that tricks me.
You said it like you spell it.
I know. And then because you know what? I doubted myself. I wrote it out. I'm like, all right, do you actually say cupboard? Is it cupboard? I don't that you got me. I folded in that moment here. I got in my own head and screwed myself. The cupboard is bare. No starters back on offense. This is about kind of like UCLA. Just don't be an abomination here in year number 1. Kind of pave the way for the future of Washington. Give me 5-7 for the Huskies as the cupboard is very bare.
Wisconsin needs Miami transfer quarterback Tyler Van Dyke to have a good season. I think Luke Fickell's going to have them trending in the right direction, but I still think it's another tough year for Wisconsin. I think it's a tough place to play. I think they're going to be better, but I have them at 6-6, 7-5. Let's go with 7-5 for the Badgers.
I like 7-5. I'm with you. I'm not sold on Tyler Van Dyke's consistency. Bama comes to town in week 3. Very difficult game. Should be a great environment, by the way, but that's going to be a really tough game to win. You have Penn State, Oregon, USC, Iowa, Nebraska, 5 really tough teams along with Alabama on that schedule.
Yeah,
You
let's
can
go
win
6-6
one for sure. But
yeah, let's go 6-6.
I'll say 7-5 here for Wisconsin. But either way, yeah, no big year 2 jump for Luke Fickell like we saw at Cincinnati here, where he took him to 11-2. It's going to be a decent year for Wisconsin. All right, that puts us at 23-17.
Not bad.
We got some work to do.
Not bad.
Not bad. Not terrible. Not bad. But that's 18-team preview in 23 minutes. So that'll do it for this edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. We are having our podcast feed drop. It should be this week. We'll let you know about it, where you can find it here very soon, but very excited about that. But in the meantime here, check us out on YouTube. Still Enrolled is where you can check us out. Well, obviously, if you're watching it, I guess you're on the YouTube page, so disregard that. But make sure you're subscribing. And if you have a conversation that Tripp and I talked about that you really want to get involved with, let us know right in the comment section. Whether you agree with what we're saying, disagree with what we're saying, overlooking a team, disrespecting a team, give us your thoughts here in the comment section as well. We'll definitely respond to them either there or on the next episode. Speaking of the next episode, Tripp, to preview ahead here, we got game predictions. Week 1 is here. We got games actually being played. Who is on upset alert? We will give you everything you need to know about week 1 in the Big Ten here. That'll be dropping Thursday morning, which is why more than ever, subscribing will do you well. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.